For 40 years, you paid a toll every time you bought a computer. Nobody told you. Nobody asked your permission. It was built into the price tag before you even walked into the store. That toll had a name. Bill Gates called it a license fee. The rest of us would call it a tax. Here's the simple math nobody explains to you. Every laptop that left a factory with Windows pre-installed cost the manufacturer between $50 and $80 just for the right to put that logo on the screen. Dell paid it, HP paid it, Lenovo paid it, decade after decade. And today, in 2026, something extraordinary is happening. The same companies that built Microsoft's empire are quietly walking away from it. Not with a press conference, not with an announcement, with silence, which, in corporate America, is usually the loudest signal there is. This is the story of how Dell, HP, and Lenovo started their secret escape from the most profitable arrangement in the history of personal computing. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why the company that built your last 10 laptops is no longer sure it wants Windows on your next one. Stick with me, because the second mistake Microsoft made is the one that should genuinely worry you. It involves your own laptop, sitting in your house right now, taking a picture of your screen every 5 seconds. Let's talk about the booth first. Before we talk about the highway, a consumer laptop manufacturer operates on a profit margin of 4 to 6%. On a $400 laptop, that's $16 to $24 of actual profit. After factories, after shipping, after marketing, after everything. Now subtract the toll. $50 to $80 gone, straight to Microsoft, before a single unit reaches a store shelf. On some models, the license fee alone exceeds the entire profit margin 3 or 4 times over. Think about what that arrangement actually looks like from the manufacturer's chair. Microsoft collects its money the moment the laptop ships. Guaranteed. No risk. Meanwhile, the manufacturer absorbs everything that happens after the sale. The customer calling because Windows is bombarding them with subscription pop-ups in the first week. The customer returning the machine because it feels sluggish out of the box. Industry data shows more than 10% of new laptops come back within the first month. Every single one of those returns gets inspected, repackaged, and resold at a discount. And the manufacturer eats that cost alone. Microsoft doesn't answer those support calls. Microsoft doesn't process those returns. Microsoft just collects. That's not a partnership. That's a toll booth on a highway someone else built and someone else maintains. For 30 years, manufacturers paid that toll without asking questions because there was no alternative on the table. Then, in 2024, one company decided to find out what would happen if they simply didn't pay it. Lenovo is one of the largest computer manufacturers on Earth. In 2024, they quietly listed a small batch of laptops on their own website. Same processors, same RAM, same screens, same factories. The only difference buried in the spec sheet was the operating system. No Windows. Linux instead. No marketing push. No announcement. Just a quiet test. The kind of test a company runs when it suspects something but isn't ready to say it out loud yet. The results came back, and people inside the company were not prepared for what they showed. Return rates dropped. Support call volume fell sharply. And when customer satisfaction surveys came in, people rated the Linux machines higher than the identical Windows versions sitting right next to them on the same shelf. Customers said the laptops felt faster, snappier, cleaner. Boot times were shorter. Nothing felt cluttered. Here's the part that should stop you cold. Lenovo changed nothing about the hardware. Same chip, same memory, same battery, same screen. One variable changed, and customers walked away believing they'd bought a better computer. They hadn't bought better hardware. They'd simply had the toll removed. But here's what makes this experiment even more damning once you understand the bigger picture. Linux wasn't some untested, experimental piece of software that Lenovo gambled on. It was already running almost everything important in the entire world. just never on the one machine sitting on your desk. Every single one of the top 500 supercomputers on Earth runs on Linux. Not one of them runs Windows. The servers behind the entire internet, the ones powering Amazon, powering Google, even powering Microsoft's own cloud business, run on Linux. And Android, the operating system on the majority of smartphones on the planet, is built directly on top of the Linux kernel. Billions of people touch Linux every single day of their lives and have no idea they're doing it. So when Lenovo discovered that Linux made their laptops faster and more reliable, they weren't stumbling onto some hidden secret. They were finally testing on a consumer laptop the same software that had already been proving itself for decades on the machines running the rest of civilization. The only reason it took this long to reach your living room is that it was never pre-installed. It was never the default. And as you're about to see, the default is exactly what started breaking. That single discovery did something you can't undo once it happens. It proved, with actual data, that decades of slowdowns, support tickets, and frustrated customers weren't the price of doing business. They were the price of one specific piece of software. And once a company with razor-thin margins sees proof like that sitting on a spreadsheet, they don't file it away and forget it. They start asking a question they would never have asked 5 years earlier. What else are we paying for that we don't actually need? That question alone wouldn't have been enough to move an entire industry. It needed a push. And Microsoft, without realizing it, was about to deliver 3 of them. The first mistake had a deadline. October 2025, the day Microsoft ended support for Windows 10 permanently on a machine that, at that point, was still running on hundreds of millions of active computers worldwide. Real computers. Used every day for work, for school, for ordinary life. Not broken, not slow, just no longer welcome. The path forward was supposed to be simple. Upgrade to Windows 11. Except Windows 11 demanded a security chip called TPM 2.0 and a newer processor generation than what most of those machines had. A perfectly functional 4-year-old laptop, one that handled email, browsers, video calls without a single complaint, was suddenly told it wasn't good enough. Picture sitting in your own home, owning a machine that has never once let you down, and being told by a company you never met that your computer is now a security risk simply for existing. That single decision did something Microsoft never intended. It made millions of ordinary people, for the first time in a generation, genuinely curious about alternatives. And think about who actually absorbed the cost of that decision. Not Microsoft. Every single hardware change Windows 11 demanded, the new security chip, the newer processor generation, the additional memory in many configurations had to be engineered, sourced, and built by the manufacturer. Multiply a few extra dollars of component cost by tens of millions of units a year, and you start to see why the people running Dell's and HP's supply chains were quietly furious about a decision they had no say in. The second mistake was recall. Marketed as the centerpiece of the new AI PC, Recall promised your computer a perfect memory. The cost of that memory was a screenshot of your entire screen, captured every 5 seconds continuously, stored in a database on your machine. Your passwords, your banking information, your private messages, all of it indexed and searchable. Security researchers found that, in its early form, that database wasn't even encrypted. One researcher built a tool that extracted the entire contents of a person's digital life in under 2 minutes. Microsoft added encryption afterward, made the feature optional, added filters. But the core design never changed. Your machine is still photographing your screen every 5 seconds. Layers of security reduce risk. They don't erase the fact that the camera never stopped running. Here's why that particular mistake mattered so much more than a typical software controversy. Recall wasn't an optional app you could simply ignore if you didn't like it. It was the justification for an entire new category of hardware. The AI PC with its dedicated NPU chip was supposed to be the reason consumers paid a premium for their next laptop. Manufacturers built marketing campaigns, retrained their sales staff, and adjusted their production lines around that exact pitch. Then, the centerpiece feature became the thing customers were most afraid of, and the manufacturers were left holding a premium product category that the public no longer trusted, built on top of a feature they didn't design and couldn't fix themselves. The third mistake happened on a stage, in public, in front of the entire industry. At CES 2026, Dell executives stood up and admitted what their own sales data was telling them. Customers were not buying laptops because of AI. If anything, AI features were making the buying decision more confusing, not less. This wasn't a critic saying it. This was one of Microsoft's largest hardware partners, the company that manufactures the machines Windows runs on, saying publicly that the entire AI PC pitch wasn't landing. Dell didn't just say it. They walked it back, returning their marketing to battery life, build quality, and reliability, the things customers had actually been asking for the whole time. 3 mistakes. 1 deadline that alienated millions of loyal users. 1 feature that broke their trust. 1 public admission from inside Microsoft's own partner network that the entire AI strategy wasn't working. That's the moment the exit door, quietly tested by Lenovo 2 years earlier, stopped being a one-off experiment and started becoming a plan. Once Lenovo proved the toll could be removed, the rest of the industry started moving, carefully, without fanfare. HP began internally evaluating Linux configurations across select product lines. Asus went further. They released the VivoBook running a Snapdragon processor with Linux preloaded, not as a developer kit, not as a niche experiment, but as a real product sitting on a real shelf next to the Windows machines. There's a reason these moves could even happen without disrupting the customer's daily life. And it's a shift most people live through without ever noticing it. Think about how you actually use a computer today compared to 15 years ago. Email runs in a browser. Your documents run in a browser. Video calls run in a browser. Even Microsoft's own Office software now runs in a browser. For most people, almost everything they do on a computer happens inside Chrome, Firefox, or Edge. And once that's true, the operating system underneath stops being something you interact with and becomes something you simply don't think about. The way you don't think about the wiring behind your wall outlet. That quiet shift is what made it safe for a manufacturer to swap the engine without the driver noticing. But the piece that finally removed the last real argument for staying loyal to Windows came from gaming. And it came from a company called Valve. For years, gaming was the one wall nobody could get past. If you wanted your games to run, you needed Windows. No debate, no workaround. Then Valve built something called Proton, a compatibility layer that lets Windows games run on Linux without developers rewriting a single line of code. In 2022, Valve released the Steam Deck, a handheld gaming device running on Linux. Millions of units sold. Most buyers never once asked what operating system was inside it. They just played their games. Today, a massive share of the entire Steam library runs on Linux through Proton, and that compatibility gap keeps narrowing every month. The single biggest reason millions of people stayed locked to Windows for 30 years has quietly stopped being a real obstacle. And the people responsible for closing that gap weren't trying to take down Microsoft. They were just trying to sell more games on a handheld device. Sometimes the biggest threats to an empire aren't the ones aimed at it directly, and it isn't only happening in the living rooms. Governments in Germany, France, South Korea, and India have all made formal moves toward open source systems and public institutions over the past 2 years. This matters more than it sounds, because government procurement decisions don't just affect a few thousand office computers. They train an entire generation of local developers on open source tools instead of proprietary ones. They shift IT certification programs toward platform agnostic skills. They quietly teach an entire workforce that Windows was never the only serious professional option, just the most common one. When governments start pulling away from a platform at the infrastructure level, the ripple effects move through software developers, IT training programs, and eventually the assumption that Windows is simply the only serious option. That assumption is the real thing dying here, not Windows itself, the assumption. We'll come back to exactly how far that government shift has gone in another video, because what's happening in Europe right now deserves its own full investigation. For now, keep this in mind. The people writing the rules for entire countries are asking the same question Lenovo asked in a quiet lab in 2024. Do we actually need this? Here's what this story is actually about. Underneath all the dates and numbers, it isn't about Linux beating Windows in some dramatic showdown. It's quieter than that, and more permanent. For 40 years, Windows didn't win because it was better. It won because it was the default, the thing already sitting in the box before you ever opened it. Defaults are the most powerful force in any industry because most people never go looking for an alternative to something they never had to choose in the first place. That is, in the end, the most expensive word in the entire personal computer industry. Default. Not better, not chosen, just there. What's happening right now in 2026 is that the default itself is cracking, and it's cracking from multiple directions at once, which is exactly why it's so hard to reverse. Manufacturers found out with real data that removing Windows lowered their costs and raised customer satisfaction at the same time. Microsoft handed millions of loyal users a reason to feel abandoned by ending support for hardware that still worked perfectly fine. A flagship privacy feature backfired badly enough that Microsoft's own hardware partners distanced themselves from it in public, on a stage, in front of the entire industry. And the last technical wall, gaming, came down through a company that wasn't even trying to compete with Microsoft directly. It was just trying to sell more handheld devices. None of this means Windows disappears next year. Let's be honest about the scale involved here. Enterprise software, corporate infrastructure, decades of legacy business systems, none of that unwinds overnight, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. Microsoft is also pouring enormous resources into AI through its cloud business, and that bet may pay off handsomely in markets that have nothing to do with the laptop sitting on your kitchen table. But dominant platforms in technology never fall in a single dramatic moment. They erode. Mainframes looked permanent until personal computers arrived and made them irrelevant for everyday use within a generation. The desktop looked permanent until the smartphone arrived and rewired how an entire planet communicates. Nobody inside those transitions saw them coming at the speed they actually happened. The people running those companies at the time had quarterly reports that looked fine right up until they didn't. They only look obvious looking backward, which is exactly why the people living through this one right now in 2026 mostly don't realize they're living through it at all. So here's the honest question worth sitting with. If your next laptop costs less, starts faster, and doesn't come with someone else's hand permanently in your wallet, would you really go back to paying the old toll just because it's familiar? Would you keep paying $80 for a logo out of habit once you knew exactly what that habit had been costing you for 40 years? That question used to be theoretical. It isn't anymore. The largest computer companies on the planet are already building the answer, quietly, one product line at a time, and most of their own customers still have no idea it's happening. If this kind of investigation is exactly what you come to this channel for, you know what to do. Subscribe, because we're going to keep pulling on threads like this one before they show up anywhere else. And if you know someone still running a laptop that just got told it's too old for the future, send them this video. They deserve to know why.